Thanks for clicking on Wayne.com for the first edition of Inside the Zone for the 2015 high school football season. Back for a second season because we gave him a tremendous raise. Justin Kinney of the News
Couldn't
Sentinel.
find anybody better.
Well,
they tried.
I wasn't going to say that, but that may be part of it. No, we appreciate your insight every week, and we'll be joining you every Monday to talk high school football. Conferences are the biggest topic of conversation, the realignment that's gone on in Northeast Indiana. So we're going to start with our conference previews this week. And when you take a look at the SAC, you add Carroll, you add Homestead, a couple of 6A programs that are pretty darn good in the past. What's your takeaway, and what are you most looking forward to about seeing these two teams in the SAC and getting that back to 10 teams in that conference?
I think, every week is a conference battle. You're not going to have teams playing out of conference. Not going to have as good as some of those games were. But every week it's 5 teams playing 5 teams, all 10 playing each other. Homestead wants to, and Carroll wants to show the SAC what they're all about. The SAC wants to show them and say, hey, you had an advantage playing in the NHC. So every week, it's going to be huge. Carroll and Homestead are going to get tested most every week in the SAC, whereas in the NHC, I think, admittedly, they would tell you there were some weeks where we could kind of cash out and kind of coast.
And I want to play devil's advocate a little bit because Homestead, because they're in the sectional, had been in the sectional with Snyder before, people say, oh, whenever they play an SAC team in the playoffs. The one thing Homestead hasn't had, and you kind of mentioned it, is as many tough opponents week in and week out to prepare them for the playoffs. You talk to Chad Zolman, Doug Dinan, they say, hey, I don't know if we're going to win the SAC, but we're going to be prepared to play those indie teams. We're going to be prepared for the playoffs like we've never been before. I think that's lost on people.
Yeah, I know. Talking to Doug Dinan over the offseason, and he said, you know what, this schedule is going to prepare us for Carmel. Back-to-back years they've lost to Carmel in regionals, and last year 56-6 they got trounced. He said, not to take away anything from some of those NHC teams, but they're not going to prepare us for regionals. Snyder's going to prepare us. Dwanger's going to prepare us. Lures, Norsyke, Concordia. Playing those teams week after week is the best preparation that Carroll can have for that 6A playoff.
And as far as the SAC goes, who do you have right off the top winning the conference? Because there are a number of options I think you go with.
It is. I think the top 3 are pretty interchangeable. I've gone back and forth. I've had Snyder, I've had Lures, I've had Carroll. But I think I'm going with Lures. Just because I like their offense, I like that makeup. We talk a lot about Noah Wazinski, Austin Mack, but that offensive line is stout. That defensive line, Damon Williams, Elijah Jett, those guys. Jimmy Sturm is solid at linebacker. I think this Lures team is one of those vintage Lures teams that we've seen in the past, and I think they're going to show it. They are my early pick to win the conference until they go out and lose week 1.
And Noah Wazinski just under 1,400 yards away from becoming the SAC's all-time leading passer. James Kanapke currently holds that. I mean, he has really grown year in and year out to the point where he is a Division I quarterback, and we play in Miami of Ohio.
Yeah, that kid can spin it, and Coach Lindsay has said this offseason he's really kind of zeroed in on his leadership abilities. They're going back and forth. He's saying what he can see, and let's change this and stuff. It's really good interpersonal relationship they have with quarterback and offensive staff because Noah can see things, diagnose things, change things. And I think that helps because they're going to have to change some stuff as teams scheme to take away Austin Mack, and they're going to see a variety of defenses to try to take him away. He's going to have to go to his secondary receivers.
That was the thing I wanted to mention too is Austin Mack is going to be such a focus. C.J. McCarter's gone. He didn't have a lot of yards, but a lot of touchdowns.
Terrell Johnson was solid.
That's the thing. They need the running mate, and it looks like Corey Griggs might be out there as the running mate for Mack because teams are going to try to take away Austin Mack day one. Easier said than done, no doubt about it. But the secondary players need to step up.
Yeah, for sure. Those underneath routes, that's why Terrell Johnson was so huge last year. He could do some slants, some curls, just over that middle kind of thing. As Mack was trying to get open deep and kind of spread that offense or that defense to make them choose, take away the short passing game and the long passing game. So they need those secondary guys to step up, and Coach Lindsay, from what it sounds like, feels like he has that.
Well, you had Lures number 1. I've got Snyder number 1 to win this conference.
Yeah, I did before, and then I changed, and then that's it's the kiss of death.
The skill position returnees that Snyder has coming back, the depth at the receiver position. I really like Isaac Stiebling at the quarterback position. I remember we were talking last year, and I was like, we just saw him in a scrimmage. He wasn't even the starter yet, and I was like, this guy can play.
Yeah.
He's going to be at Eastern Michigan University after this season. Money Woods, you got a name like Money Woods, you got to be good, right?
Yeah, you do.
They don't have as much experience on the offensive and defensive line, but and kind of not a lot of well-known defensive players, but it seems like every year they replace them with, especially at the linebacking core, guys that can step up.
Yeah.
They got to replace Jesse Bates in the secondary and his leadership, but they've got players there. I really like what Snyder has, and I think they're just a tick, in my mind, better than Lures at this point.
No, I can't argue. I think those, like I said, those top three teams I think are interchangeable. And we look at that defense and say, well, they've lost, Jalen Fowler and they've lost Bates and but Snyder just replaces talent with talent. Just because we don't know these guys' names doesn't mean they're not going to be good. Guys like Isaiah Knight, a defensive back, I think is going to have a tremendous year for them. And you mentioned it, so many weapons on offense. You got Malik Bramley, you got Mac Hippenhammer. You mentioned Money Woods, David Turner, wide receiver. It's an embarrassment of riches on offense. I think you're going to see a lot more spread formations out of Snyder because Stiebling can spin it and he can run it too. So I think you're going to see a lot more spread formations out of Snyder this year.
I think you had Carroll third as well?
Carroll third.
That's where I had them as well.
And I just worked on my Carroll preview today and I go, maybe they should be higher because, they returned 7 starters on defense. They replaced 2 starters on defense with seniors. They got Aiden Smith. I love they're going to go 4 wide. Coach Dinan said, we're going to go 4 wide because we really don't have a tight end that we feel is a true tight end that can be big and burly and staying in block but also get out and run. Alex Anzavino, a running back, over 800 yards last year, I think is underrated. So you look at Carroll, they are inexperienced along that offensive line and defensive line. But if that comes together, you look at it and their skill players are on par with what Snyder and Lures have, in my opinion.
At the beginning of last season, they had a little bit of a quarterback issue. They weren't sure who they were going to go with. They've got Cody Dinan now at wide receiver, kind of a rangy kid, knows the offense. Aiden Smith settled in a quarterback, and he's going to Northwestern, so
yeah, he's decent.
He's a Big Ten guy. So that's kind of settled. They're settled at the quarterback position with the D1 quarterback, and the wide receivers are now fleshed out. What do you see as the biggest issue for their transition to the SAC to be competitive for a championship in that conference right off the bat?
I think they cannot get into offensive shootouts, which is, they held 6 opponents to 7 points or less last year. So that defense was no slouch. I just want to see if they can adjust to the SAC game and the speed, and it goes for Homestead's defense too, and see if they can match up. I think they can, but how many games, because we saw it last year with Carroll and they'd win close game after close game, and those things eventually even out. So is this year where they lose a 3-point game as opposed to win a 3-point game? So eventually those things kind of balance themselves, and if it's 31-28, 35-33, I think some of those games are eventually going to go against Carroll if they do get in a fair amount of those games this year.
Homestead's transition to the SAC, obviously in their system, the quarterback role, and any system, quarterback plays a big role, but in their system specifically, they start with Ben Skronik at wide receiver, one of the best in the state, 6'4", going to Northwestern. What do you see as their biggest key to transitioning into the SAC and playing well? I
think you mentioned it as quarterback. I think, Coach Zolman says he has 2 guys, just hasn't decided yet. He's going to decide after the scrimmage on Friday. Who's going to get those guys the ball? Ben Skronik, Austin Kreider is solid. Those guys are good, but who's going to get them the ball? And that's a huge thing. It's a concern, but we've seen in the past with Homestead quarterbacks that they're able to perform. And their offense is so relies on timing routes over the middle, crossing routes, and stuff like that. I think you don't need a guy that can really throw it downfield 40, 50 yards necessarily as a guy who can get the ball on target in those timing routes. So I think that's huge for them. This is a conference this year. You're going to have to score points to be in the upper 4 or 5 teams in the conference. So that's the question with Homestead. Can they score points? And they need a quarterback to do that. We haven't mentioned the Wayne Generals yet. This is a team, first time since 1993 that they won a share of the victory bell. 9-2 last season. Their coach moves on to be closer to home, so they've got Derek Moore now leading this program. What do you see in Wayne? Because if there's one team in the SAC you say, wow, man, they got really hit hard by graduation, it would be them. But then you've got Austin Robertson, who is ranked by many as the #1 senior in the state of Indiana. Yeah, that defensive line is going to be tough with Austin Robertson. Jock Thomas is solid too. But you mentioned it, the loss of so many talented guys and a team that played a lot of guys both ways. Talking to Derek Moore, he's really excited about this team. They got increased numbers out, which, winning helps. That's the bottom line. If you win in this conference, in this area, you are going to get more kids out. And I think he has 75 kids out this year, 9 through 12. I think last year it was closer to 50. So that's going to help depth-wise. But, they gave up a fair amount of points last year with those talented players on defense. So I expect them to take a step back defensively, even with Austin Robertson and Jock Thomas, just because I don't know the kid's linebacker. And I just, how do you replace the Powers and Kai Black and stuff like that? So they're going to have to be another team, I think, that's going to have to outscore people. Jonas Thatcher at quarterback, we don't know. I think he's got a better arm than Keon. But Keon, we saw how many times we see it where things would break down, and he would just, I would look down to write something down like he had gotten tackled, and look up, he's running down the sidelines, I mean, that's what you're going to need out of Jonas Thatcher.
Yeah, I saw Jonas in practice last week. Liked him a lot. I say the most impressive thing that I've seen so far is just how the players have responded to Derek Moore, how quiet they were when he was talking in practice. Discipline, as we know, has been an issue in the Wayne program. He seems like he's got those guys believing, playing. Easier to do when you're 0-0, but I'll tell you what, he was a good choice for the head coaching position at Wayne. I really like what he's doing.
And that's the key with Wayne is, like I mentioned, 1 year, I mean, you get more kids out. It just builds up the entire program. And that's I'm waiting to see South and Northrop. All they need is that 1 year. And they don't even need to win the SAC. They need to win 4 games. And then all of a sudden it just starts rising.
This has to be the longest preview in history of the SAC where Dwenger hasn't been mentioned. So we set a record there. 4-6 last season. Chris Schwarzkopf sidelined this year. We definitely, friend of the program, hope he does. Hope his recovery goes well as he recovers from lymphoma. Ernie Bodrab, veteran coach in the area, he takes over for 1 season. What do you see as being the biggest key for Dwenger to bounce back? Because part of the reason that they're 4-6 is because they played a really tough non-conference schedule.
Yeah.
So let's throw that out there. Blake Pichelny is going to be in at quarterback for Cody Miller. What do you see as being the big keys to having a more Dwenger-esque season?
I'm glad you mentioned Blake because I don't know if I can pronounce his last name. So
it's going to be spell check's worst nightmare this season.
Every time I see that L in there, I'm like, this isn't spelled right.
There should be more vowels, but he can throw it.
Yeah.
We saw him in the Summit City 7-on-7 shootout. These guys look pretty good. I think maybe people are sleeping on him a little bit because you see 4-6 and that's
and I think the stability at the quarterback spot will help out big time if they can get that. But they just need, and missing the last couple of years is just that Dwenger coming out in a warm-ups when they have 100 kids out there warming up, and you just feel like they already have the other team down. Just the physicality, their attitude that we are Dwenger and we have state championships and we have SAC championships and stuff, and I just haven't felt that. I just don't feel like teams are intimidated by Bishop Dwenger when they're at Zollner and they come off that bus and they just keep coming off and coming off and coming off. I just don't feel that. I don't think they feel that vibe, and I just don't know if this is the year to get it back because they don't return a lot they lose a lot defensively. I think they lose 5 of their top 6 tacklers. Mm-hmm. Still don't see a butt ton of talent at the skill positions. So to me, I'm looking at it, I don't see it again. I think the last 4 years they've lost 22 games. And from 2004 to 2011 they lost 11 games, and it's going to turn out around eventually. We're not saying Dwenger's done, but I just don't see it this year.
One team that I think will be better than they were last year, although it might not translate to wins and losses, Concordia. Yeah. I actually thought at 4-6 last year, I thought they were surprisingly competitive. Considering they lost David Morrison and so many players the year before to graduation. They returned 18 starters, Coach said, and they've got some talented guys, some big guys on the offensive line. The Jacksons there, they're a good core to build around on either side of the line. Quarterback is back, a lot of wide receivers back. I think this
Peterson Curligran.
Yeah, Peterson Curligran. Yeah, over 1,200 yards last season as a sophomore, which is no slouch in the SAC. This is a team, and Coach will tell you this, wins and losses might not be better this year, but they could be a much tougher team this coming season.
Yeah, I think the key for Concordia is that defense because that's another team last year that scored a lot of points but also gave up a lot of points. I think if that defense is better and can keep teams 20, 25 points because they should be able to score. The problem was last year they couldn't prevent people from scoring either. So you mentioned it's so much offensive production coming back. Sparks at quarterback and his brother at wide receiver. You lose C.J. Morris, transfer to South. Who was a really solid player for them on the outside at wide receiver. But there's 2 teams in the SAC I really don't know. Concordia and Northside, I really don't know what to expect. But Concordia definitely has plenty of talent coming back.
That's the next team I wanted to touch on briefly because Northside, you got Arian Nieves, who's a sophomore, got some good experience last year. Ryan Hall's a good defensive coach. I know he wasn't happy with the performance stat-wise defensively last year. How do they turn it around? Because at this point last season, we were talking about they're the defending SAC champs.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned Concordia may be better, but the record may not translate. I mean, Northside's another candidate for that. I think Coach Hall's really excited with his offensive and defensive lines. I think Northside's going to be a lot tougher in the trenches than we're used to. which allows you to change some things on what you do. Northside's big problem the last couple of years, those short yardage situations. We saw it in the sectional against Snyder a couple of years ago where they couldn't score. They're inside the 5, first down inside the 5. I mean, those short yardage situations they need to figure out. Arion Nieves is, I think, in the conference he's in, when we talk about Wazinski and Smith and Stiebling, he kind of is overshadowed. But as a junior, I think he breaks out. The thing with Northside is, we mentioned it, the lines are solid. Coach Hall needs to figure out his skill positions. We're not used to hearing that. Keyshawn Watson, tremendous for them last year. He moved to Ohio, so that's a huge loss for them in the backfield. So Northside's kind of that unknown. I don't know what to expect. They start with South, and then they get Carroll and Homestead back-to-back.
Northrop and Southside, the last two teams we're going to touch on as far as the SAC goes. What do they need to do? Because South, they got C.J. Morris. They've got Dennis Johnson coming back. He got some starting experience as a sophomore at quarterback. And then Northrop, Jason Dorfel, just trying to build that program. You got a big school in the SAC, but they're just kind of looking to turn the corner. Jason Ash at running back could be a star for them.
Yeah, South, you know, I talked to Coach Norfleet a couple days ago, and that's a proud program. That's a winning program. You know, they're 5 straight losing seasons, the most consecutive losing seasons in program history for that team, going back to the 1920s. So that is a team that's going to come back and bounce back, and I think you take that next step this year, hopefully. Northrop, I mean, you know, Coach Dorfler, tremendous guy. It's just, it's very tough right now to win Northrop. You know, they lose some transfers to New Haven. You know, you got a huge enrollment there. Nobody wants to play football. So it's tough. And then you are at a conference where now you don't have a couple non-conference where I'm going to schedule a couple of games I know I can win so we can at least get a couple wins. Now you're in a meat grinder of a schedule where you have no off weeks. So I'm hoping, you know, positive things for Coach Dorfler, but it's definitely tough at Northrop right now.